The string light strung across the terrace swayed gently in the evening breeze, casting a soft amber glow over the outdoor cafe. The clinking of cutlery, the occasional burst of laughter from other tables, and the hum of passing traffic blended together into the kind of background music that made people feel both exposed and comforted at once. Emma sat at a small round table tucked near the corner, nervously adjusting the sleeve of her blue cardigan as she checked her watch for the third time in as many minutes. She wasn't supposed to be here. Not really. At 28, Emma had a busy enough life as it was. She was a pediatric nurse at the Children's Hospital downtown, a role that consumed long hours, endless emotional energy, and left little room for social endeavors like blind dates. But this evening, she wasn't here for herself. She was here for Melissa, her best friend since college, who had called that morning in sheer distress. Melissa had been struck down by food poisoning and couldn't possibly drag herself out of bed, but she had been scheduled to meet a man that night, a blind date arranged by a mutual acquaintance. She begged Emma not to let him sit there waiting alone, thinking he had been stood up. Emma, despite her protest that she looked exhausted, was still wearing her work clothes and wasn't in the right mindset for small talk, eventually relented. Melissa had pleaded with her. "Please, just go." Explain to him what happened. Tell him I wanted to be there. It'll be kinder than leaving him wondering. So here she was. Emma tugged once more at the sleeve of her cardigan, self-conscious of her simple outfit. A gray sweater layered under the cardigan, dark work slacks, and a pair of plain flats. Hardly date attire. She sighed and sipped a glass of water the waiter had set down earlier. That was when she noticed a man moving through the cafe entrance, scanning the tables. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair neatly styled in a way that matched his navy suit, well-tailored, expensive without being ostentatious. He looked exactly as Melissa had described him, yet something in his posture caught Emma's attention more than his clothes. He carried himself like a man who bore weight unseen by others. The slight slouch in his shoulders, the heaviness in his eyes, the kind of quiet weariness that came only from long days filled with responsibility. His gaze landed on her, and he approached. "Melissa?" he asked, his tone polite but edged with hesitation, as though he already suspected the truth. Emma shook her head quickly, rising slightly from her chair. "Actually, I'm Emma, Melissa's friend. She asked me to meet you. She's not feeling well tonight." He blinked, taken aback, but his voice softened. "I see. I'm Daniel Mitchell. Is she all right?" "Food poisoning," Emma explained. "She's mortified to cancel at the last minute, but she didn't want you sitting here without an explanation." For a brief moment, Daniel was silent, processing. Then, with a small nod, he gestured to the chair across from her. "That was thoughtful of her and of you. May I?" "Of course," Emma said, feeling oddly relieved he hadn't simply excused himself. Daniel sat down, adjusting his jacket. "I ordered tea while I waited. I wasn't sure how long you'd be." Emma smiled faintly. "Not at all. Actually, if you don't mind, maybe I'll join you for a few minutes? It's been a long day, and I'm not quite ready to go home to an empty apartment." His eyes, warm brown with tired shadows underneath, studied her briefly. She thought she saw something vulnerable in them, something that didn't match the polished exterior. "I'd like that." Emma shifted, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "I should warn you, though, I'm not exactly in my best form for conversation. I just finished a 12-hour shift." "You're a doctor?" "A pediatric nurse," she corrected gently. "We had a particularly challenging case today." Daniel nodded in understanding, his expression softening. "Then I'm grateful you stayed, even after a day like that. What kind of work keeps me in a suit this late?" He gave a small, almost self-deprecating smile. "I run a medical device company. We're developing equipment for children's hospitals." Emma straightened slightly. Her professional curiosity immediately piqued. "Really? What kind of equipment?" And just like that, the conversation shifted from polite necessity to something genuine. Daniel explained how his company was working on innovative monitoring systems for pediatric intensive care units. His words carried the energy of someone who cared deeply, even if his fatigue tried to mask it. Emma found herself leaning in, sharing the day-to-day challenges she faced with existing devices. Their quirks, their flaws, the small frustrations that became enormous in emergencies. Daniel listened, really listened. You know, he said thoughtfully after a while, I've spent months reviewing proposals and meeting with administrators, but I've never had the chance to speak with someone who actually uses this equipment every day. Emma laughed softly, though her words were tinged with seriousness. It's frustrating sometimes. The people designing these machines rarely ask nurses what would actually help. What would be helpful? Daniel asked, leaning forward, his tea forgotten. And so Emma told him. She described the clunky alarms that sometimes went unheard in chaotic wards, the overly complicated touchscreens that slowed nurses in critical moments, the need for designs that accounted for both urgency and human error. As she spoke, Daniel's eyes lit with a spark of ideas taking root. Emma, this is exactly the kind of feedback we need. Would you consider consulting with our development team? She froze for a moment, blinking at him. Me? I'm just a nurse. I don't have engineering or business credentials. Daniel shook his head. You have something more valuable than that. You have experience. You know what actually works in the middle of a crisis. Emma hesitated, but the sincerity in his voice was undeniable. For the first time that night, she felt like she wasn't simply filling in for Melissa. She was part of a conversation that mattered. The evening stretched on, the string lights dimming slightly as more tables emptied, but Emma and Daniel's words flowed easily. They spoke not just of technology, but of families, patients, and the quiet strength it took to care for them. Somewhere along the way, Daniel revealed a part of himself Emma hadn't expected. He was a single father. His daughter, Sophie, was 6 years old and had been born with congenital heart condition. My motivation isn't just business, Daniel admitted softly. Sophie spent more of her life in hospitals than at playgrounds. I want her and kids like her to have better. Emma's throat tightened. That's the part of my job they don't teach you in school, she murmured. How to stay hopeful for families when they can't find it themselves. Daniel looked at her then, really looked, as though seeing past a cardigan and tired eyes to something deeper. And for the first time all evening, Emma thought that maybe Melissa's misfortune wasn't misfortune at all. The waiter returned once to ask if they wanted anything else. Daniel ordered another tea, while Emma settled on chamomile. Neither seemed in a rush to leave. The conversation, once rooted in obligation, had begun to feel like a thread neither of them wanted to cut. For a while, they drifted into silence, sipping their drinks, both strangely comfortable with the quiet. Then Daniel spoke again, his voice lower, almost reflective. You know, Emma, I wasn't sure about tonight. Blind dates always feel a bit like job interviews disguised as dinners. But this feels different. Honest. Emma smiled faintly. Well, I'm hardly the candidate you were supposed to meet. Maybe not, he said, a shadow of a smile tugging at his lips. But I think I met the right person anyway. Emma felt her cheeks warm, unsure what to say. She wasn't used to compliments that went beyond surface-level flattery. But something about Daniel's tone carried no pretense. He meant it. By the time they finally rose from the table, the terrace was nearly empty. They walked slowly to the sidewalk, reluctant to part ways. Daniel adjusted his cufflinks absently before looking at her. Thank you for staying, Emma. For more than just a message. For this conversation. I needed it. She nodded, clutching her cardigan tighter against the chill. So did I. 3 months later, Emma found herself in an entirely different setting. Instead of the cozy glow of cafe lights, she sat under the stark white fluorescence of Daniel's office, reviewing prototypes spread across his sleek conference table. She could hardly believe how quickly things had shifted. That night, what had begun as an act of kindness for a friend had transformed into something that consumed her thoughts and her time in the best possible way. After their meeting, Daniel had followed up, at first professionally, inviting her to share feedback with his team. She had hesitated, doubting whether her input could really matter, but he had insisted. Soon, she was attending brainstorming sessions, sketching ideas, and pointing out design flaws that only a nurse on the front lines would recognize. Her insights weren't just noted, they were implemented. Daniel's engineers adjusted layouts, simplified controls, even redesigned alarm systems based on her real-world experiences. For the first time in her career, Emma felt her frustrations weren't just vented in a staff lounge. They were changing something tangible. Daniel entered the room, a stack of contracts in his hand. His suit jacket was draped over a chair, his tie loosened, but his expression carried that same mixture of exhaustion and determination Emma had first seen. "Good news," he said, sliding the papers toward her. "The hospital board approved the pilot program. They want to start with your unit." Emma's heart lifted. "That's wonderful. The other nurses will be thrilled to be part of testing. They've been asking me about it for weeks." Daniel smiled, then hesitated, his gaze lingering on her. "Emma, there's something else I've been meaning to say. About the work, yes, but also about us." Her breath caught. She knew this moment had been building. Long hours spent side by side, countless conversations about more than just equipment. About Sophie, about Emma's patients, about life's unexpected turns. Somewhere in the blur of professional collaboration, they had built something more personal. "These past few months," Daniel continued, his voice softer now, "have been the most meaningful of my career, but they've also been the most meaningful of my life. You reminded me why I started this, why it matters, and you become more than just a consultant." Emma felt a tremor in her chest, part anticipation, part fear. "Daniel," he interrupted gently, "Sophie keeps asking when she'll get to meet the nice nurse who helps Daddy make hospitals better. I think she already senses how important you are." Emma's lips curved into a smile she couldn't suppress. "I'd love to meet her." Daniel exhaled, relief mingled with gratitude. "She has a cardiology appointment next week. Would you consider being there? Not as consultant, but as someone who cares about us." The invitation was simple, yet it carried the weight of trust and hope. Emma nodded. "Yes, I'd be honored." 6 months later, Emma stood in the pediatric ward where she had spent so many of her own long shifts, but tonight, she wasn't there as just a nurse. She was watching Daniel install the very first production model of the monitoring system they had designed together. The machine gleamed with newness, its screens clearer, its alarms intuitive, its design thoughtful in ways that only months of collaboration between caregiver and creator could have produced. And by Daniel's side was Sophie, the little girl, bright-eyed and curious, peppered them both with questions. Her dark hair framed her face, and though a faint scar peeked out from beneath the collar of her dress, her energy was contagious. "Nurse Emma," Sophie said seriously, tugging at her hand. "Daddy told me you helped make this machine so nurses can take better care of kids like me." Emma knelt to meet her eye level. "Your daddy did most of the work. I just told him what would be helpful." Sophie tilted her head thoughtfully, as though weighing the truth. Then, with the wisdom only children seem to possess, she declared, "That's what families do. They help each other." Emma's throat tightened. She looked over Sophie's shoulder at Daniel, who was watching them with quiet affection. In that moment, Emma understood she wasn't just part of a project or a pilot program. She was becoming part of a family. As the evening wound down, and Sophie skipped ahead to examine the machine one more time, Daniel moved closer to Emma. His voice was low, meant only for her. "That night, you came to explain why Melissa couldn't make it. I thought I was losing a potential date. But instead," Emma finished softly, "you gained a partner." He smiled, eyes warm. "A partner who understands my work, shares my values, and reminds me that the best innovations come from listening to the people who care most." Emma slipped her hand into his, the gesture natural, inevitable. She realized then that sometimes life's greatest turns come disguised as inconveniences. She had shown up that night to deliver a message for a sick friend, but she had found so much more. She had found her purpose renewed. She had found love she hadn't been searching for. And she had found her place in a family that needed not just her expertise, but her heart. The string lights of that cafe terrace seemed a world away now, yet Emma knew that was where everything had begun. The night obligation turned into opportunity, and opportunity into the extraordinary.